Hello and welcome to Business Matters. I'm Ed Butler. On the programme today, Sheryl Sandberg, for years the First Lady of Tech, is standing down from her executive role at Meta. Is this a reflection of the more turbulent times that are now affecting Facebook? I'm going to be joined throughout the programme by two guests on opposite sides of the world. Andy Shea, he's an independent economist based in Shanghai in China. Bit of a clue there, I think. Andy, hello, welcome to the show.
Good morning, Ed.
Great to talk to you again. Andy Shea, I want to bring you in here in China. I mean, it's obviously we know that the big tech firms there have been under pressure also on these antitrust questions, which are similar in some ways there, aren't they? I mean, obviously there are lots of different issues in China, but I mean, let's be honest, women have not been prominent figures on either side of the Pacific when it comes to the tech world.
I think that in China a lot of VC investors are women. So I think in that regard there is participation there. I think the issue is in China far more political. That these social media companies seem to be contributing to social instability, and the government obviously is very conscious of that, and so that's why it's cracking down. And gender in China is not as much of an issue as in the West today. It's still very much driven by political concerns.
Andy, I mean, I've referred to the antitrust moves, and those are an issue, obviously, that will have to play out in the courts. It'll take a long time in the United States, whether or not Facebook gets kind of peeled away from WhatsApp and Instagram and the other platforms it controls. That remains to be seen. What is happening in China with regard to the big tech firms? Because I know that the moves made by the government there, that the slamming down on the big names, it was designed, wasn't it, to introduce more competition? Is there any sense that is happening?
Hello, Ed.
Hi. Can you hear me? Yes.
Yes. I think that in China, it's the government is trying to control these companies directly. So that is a different approach from the West. The West is trying to use antitrust laws to look at these companies. But in China, the government is much more straightforward. They want to impose direct control on these companies. They want to decide who are in charge of these companies, and they tell the companies what you can and cannot do. So this is because of these internet companies they inherently they are monopolies. They have economy of scale. These so-called network economies of scale. It's very hard to manage, and they do things on day-to-day basis to exploit the human weaknesses, and so that would lead to not just bad market consequences, also social instability. And in China, the Communist Party is in charge, and they understand who are threats. So obviously they are cracking down.
Staying with the corporate world, last night we reported to you that police raids were taking place on one of Germany's leading asset management firms, DWS, in Frankfurt. The offices of its majority owner, Deutsche Bank, were also being targeted following allegations of greenwashing in Germany. Well, now the chief executive of DWS, Asoka Verman, has resigned over the claims that investors were misled over the environmental impact of the company's investments, although it does still deny those allegations. Ethical or green investments are becoming increasingly popular, and a whole industry called ESG, environmental, social and governance, has grown up around it, with funds worth by some estimates, $40 trillion worldwide. That's about a third of all managed investments. Companies have been increasingly criticized for not being quite as green as they claim to be. It's important to mention, Andy Shea, isn't it, here, that this is a gigantic industry. I mean, perhaps I don't know how big it is in the Chinese market, but 40 trillion. I mean, BlackRock is, of course, a leader. It's the best known name in this area, but there are many other companies who have grown and have really peddled this idea that you can using capital measures, capital tools of the market, you can adjust the way that business operates and the way that it directs us towards a greener, more sustainable future.
Yeah, I think people want to feel better even when they are making money. So since the sustainability is such an important issue, so people do care. So that's why financial firms are selling products like that. But as usual, the Wall Street sells products because it think it's making money, and obviously it will try to get away with whatever it can. But the fact is, global consumption of hydrocarbon is rising, not falling. Okay, and the prices of oil and natural gas are so high now. It means that there's tremendous demand. So in this kind of environment, how could companies be totally green? So that is really hard to understand. You look at if Apple say uses solar power for its offices in the United States, does that make Apple a green company? You have to look at its supply chain. Look at its how its components are made. From that sense, really very few companies in the world can be considered genuinely green.
Yeah, and there are those kind of pale shades of green, aren't there? I mean, there is that question, for instance, about whether nuclear is considered green now, which, to many people it is, but to other, of course, environmentalists, there are big questions about it. There are certainly questions over gas, and yet it wasn't long ago that we were all saying, gas is greener because it is greener than maybe coal or oil in terms of its impact on the market.
Yeah, that is correct. So it's really shading the truth. And on nuclear we can debate because I don't see how we can get to carbon neutral without nuclear. You have to show me that there is no science to back that up. So I think that we can argue about that. It's one of the two of the lesser evils. But in terms of kind of natural gas and coal, oil, natural gas, it's really shades of gray. And I don't see that how they all can be environmentally sustainable.
There is an argument here, I think, which is also about just the market and market mechanisms. And this was put to me by a former BlackRock executive. He said that essentially, you can divest from, let's say, Exxon or BP or one of these big oil companies and feel like you're doing the right thing. But it doesn't actually change anything, because if you're just pulling your money out of those funds or your pension fund pulls out of them, they're just going to sell on that stock to someone else, maybe a big hedge fund somewhere else. So in other words, it doesn't actually long-term necessarily hurt that firm. It's the core incentives that drive companies towards doing dirty things, let's say, drilling for fossil fuels and other undesirable activities, that's going to create things. So actually it's about regulation. It cannot be done through market mechanisms.
Yeah, I actually disagree with these regulation incentives to motivate the people to do the right thing. I think that when it comes to energy sustainability, environmental sustainability, you have to change the macro environment. I think nobody at the micro level can really change the reality. So the governments have to change the environment. Yeah. I think in that regard, that China is clearly moving in nuclear power. You can say that if it's good or bad. So China is building.
We're going to have to leave it there, Andy. We're kind of coming to the half hour. We'll have more from you in the next 30 minutes. Do stay with us. Welcome back to Business Matters with me, Ed Butler, with Andy Shea. He's an independent economist in Shanghai. It has been a tough 65 days, 65 very long days for Shanghai. But China's commercial capital is finally open for business again. Most citizens, it seems, spent the first day of freedom celebrating. The lockdown was only meant to last 9 days. State media said it was to lessen the impact on the city's economy, but the extended lockdown did become a focal point for increasing anger and frustration at the country's hardline approach to tackling its COVID outbreak. It has left deep scars for some citizens. Many spent weeks apparently going hungry with inadequate supplies of food and medicine, and the once vibrant economy was brought to a standstill. Everybody who's been allowed out still needs a positive COVID test every 2 days, and the queues are an hour long for many citizens, or maybe longer. So everyone seems to have to spend most of their days queuing just for the right to be outside. Andy Shea, have you been outside? You're in Shanghai. Were you on the streets today whooping and shouting and bursting into song?
No, I think that the celebration is kind of really not justified. When you slide down so much, then you come back up a little, then you are supposed to celebrate. I think that it's time to reflect. It's not like that we are out of the woods. We're still under zero COVID. And things have changed in some ways permanently, like the queue for PCR swab PCR swab kiosks. So you have to do that every 72 hours, or you cannot get about. And also that the office buildings are still closed. And restaurants can only serve in outdoor areas. So the city is not really fully back in action yet. We are, I would say, only 30% there, and probably under the zero COVID regime, we'll never get back to 100%.
Yeah, well, the economy, as you say, must still be massively suffering. Are regular citizens being compensated because of the economic losses that they must be suffering?
No, China didn't do that in 2000 when it began, when most Western governments were doing that. I think the Chinese government doesn't hand out the money, and Chinese people never expect the money from their government. They expect the government to tax them. Okay, so that's the way it is, and the Chinese people tend to save money for rainy days. And the government expects you to do that. So they expect people to have savings. You'll be able to cope with something like that. So obviously, most people have been able to get through because they have savings. But beyond that, there will be a huge impact on consumption. The household deposit levels are down. So people are drawing down their savings, so that you would expect that would affect their consumption decisions, like the big ticket purchase items like cars and so forth will not come back so easily.
Yeah, and of course this all came on the back of what was already a crisis in the property market, wasn't it, there in China?
Yeah.
There have been these issues with supply chains. How are the exports getting on at the moment? Is the port still functioning there?
Yeah, I think the port. Now the government has introducing a new concept called internal circulation. Internal circulation means that the most well-known example is Tesla factory in Shanghai. It's back to action because the people working there live there, and they become self-contained. They don't contact the outside world. So China the government is trying to revive the supply chain by doing that. So the supply chain becomes many, like millions of distinct islands. These islands are not supposed to be connected by humans, but are connected by computers. So that's what the government is doing to get exports going. Exports fell in February a little, but not much, a lot less than I expected. I guess a lot more in March, but we don't know if this internal circulation will bring manufacturing fully back.
We talk about Shanghai, I guess, because it's so prominent, it's so visible. Everyone's on social media, they're sharing their sights, their sounds, the videos. We're hearing about the protests. Are there other cities facing the same restrictions still more seriously elsewhere in China?
Shanghai was an extreme example because I think the central government thought Shanghai stepped out of the line, and we're not paying sufficient attention to zero COVID policy. So that's why a lot of really stringent measures were imposed on Shanghai. But in some other places, they've been suffering for half a year. Like the farmers in northern China were not allowed to plant the spring crops because you got to have some sort of certificate to be able to walk to the field to plant your crop. So extreme measures like that have been all over the country. Half of the economy has been affected by lockdowns or partial lockdowns.
And we can
So
only
I
imagine
think
the long-term economic effect of that.
yeah, I think that the Chinese government is not putting the economy first or even second. I think that the Chinese government is paranoid of COVID. We don't understand why. But they think very different from what the scientists are talking about. So they insist that decisions are made by government, not the scientists. So the government will have the final say. So the zero COVID will be with us for a long time, and that the economy will remain subdued during the meantime.
How close is it to normality, would you say? I mean, you have been out in the last 24 hours. What's
Yeah,
it look like?
yeah. Well, the schools are not open, and that is a big sign of normality if schools are open. So if the schools are not open, and the restaurants, you cannot really get into a restaurant. You can get a takeout, or if the restaurant has outdoor tables, then it can serve. So this PCR test. You have to verify you visually, every time you get on a bus. So that's really time consuming. I don't understand how people can squeeze in subway cars once the office buildings are open. It just takes them too long. So I don't know. Right now I would say the city is 20 to 30% normal because people
Right.
can walk outside. But there's not much you can do other than that.
Okay, Andy, we'll leave it there. Thank you for that very, very vivid picture of what life is like there. We're going to hear now from another country, the Himalayan nation of Nepal, which says that tourists have gradually started to return there after the country lifted travel restrictions imposed because of COVID-19. More than 50,000 foreign tourists visited the country in April. That is a high number compared to the last couple of years. The highest monthly figure, in fact, for the last 2 years. So Nepal's tourism industry faces huge challenges. I mean, Andy, how soon do you think Chinese, he's saying that Chinese make up the bulk or a large subset of those who tend to visit Nepal. How many Chinese will soon be heading back to Nepal for a holiday, do you think?
Well, it's impossible because the government restricts exits. So you cannot really go abroad for tourism, even if you are willing to accept 2 weeks of quarantine on the way back. This is a new measure imposed during the last 2 months. So China was the largest source of tourism revenue before the pandemic in the world. A lot of countries depended on that, like Indonesia, Thailand, Indonesia, Nepal. So I think that what's going on in China is unlikely to change. And 1/10 of the people in the world depend on tourism for making a living. I think what's going on is really a tragedy.
Okay, inflation is a problem, of course, affecting countries all over the world right now. The cost of living crisis, as we're calling it in Europe. Malaysia has come up with an interesting short-term fix for its problems. It's banned the export of chicken to increase the food supply at home. The price of chicken has been capped since February at about $2 a bird. There have been subsidies for poultry farmers, but countries who rely on the imports from Malaysia of chickens are bracing for shortages. Malaysia, of course, is only one of several countries that have curbed food exports to reduce prices. India, Indonesia, Turkey, Argentina and Egypt are among more than 20 nations who've imposed some sort of limit on exports of things like wheat, poultry, or cooking oil since the war in Ukraine began. Now, a lack of wheat, there's a lack of cooking oil, there's a lack of rice, apparently. These are all of the major staples around the world. Andy Shea, I mean, this is becoming very, very serious. We're probably only seeing the beginning of this, aren't we, globally?
Yeah, I think that Russia and Ukraine combined really account for a big share of the global food market, and obviously Russia has no incentive of keeping the market supplied. It's a bargaining chip.
Yeah.
So I think that this is going to be a huge problem, and we on top of that we have had this crazy monetary growth over the last few years, especially during the pandemic when the central banks pumped so much money into the economies because they thought they could save the economies, even though the economies suffered because people couldn't get to work. So we have this monetary overhang out there, and now we have shortage. The combination leads to this tremendous inflation, and there are a lot of poor people get priced out. So we're going to see hunger in lots of countries.
It's leading to all kinds of responses. I mean, Andy was outlining, the problem with Ukraine, and Ukraine and Russia combined, two of the biggest wheat exporters in the world. Andy, I just wonder, this cost of living thing, to what extent there in Shanghai are you noticing this yourself in the markets? I mean, is the price of staples going up? Are you feeling it in terms of, you were mentioning how farmers in the north of the country weren't able to plant their crops. I mean, is it starting to be felt in the cost of staples there?
Oh, during the pandemic, obviously the supplies were restricted, so prices went up a lot. It's many basic items like vegetables like really doubled or even tripled. Now the prices are coming down a little bit as the supply chain gets back a bit. But overall, the inflationary trend has been going on for quite a while. Food items have been going at a double-digit rate for quite a while. So I think that the cost of living is very high in China, and the government is trying to control that. But the Chinese government has a huge grain reserve,
Right.
and the government always is scared of food shortage. So in times like this, I guess that they will release the reserves to help ease with the situation. But for many other countries that are totally dependent on imports, like North African countries, I don't see how they can solve their problems.
Yeah, I mean, the other problem here as well is fertilizers, isn't it? We haven't talked about that, but the high price of fuel has actually made fertilizers far more expensive, and perhaps has deterred some farmers from using as much or even getting access to as much around the world, which could in longer term affect future crops.
Oh yeah. You look at it. Obviously, Chinese government will come out and buy. They would use. They have reserves, so it's really the poor countries in the world that don't have foreign exchange reserves, and they don't have domestic much domestic production. These countries like Egypt, like Liberia, these countries will suffer hugely.
Thank you very much, Andy Shea, there in Shanghai with your thoughts. Thank you for joining us here on Business Matters, and thanks to you as well for listening. We'll be back same time tomorrow.